there. I'm working on doing some epoxy filler in my hardwood floor. I've got these big cracks in between each one of the tongue and groove floorboards, and so I'm trying something new, which is new for me. Epoxy. This is System 3, made for wood filler resin and hardener. And what I'm going to try is mixing it with sawdust, or as they call it, wood flour. Here's wood flour as sold by System 3, and this wood flour is a light color. I think it's made almost entirely as a thickener, kind of if you want to thicken up your epoxy so it doesn't run so much, but not so much as a colorant. And so following some advice from some other wood floors in the industry, I'm trying something else as well, which is making my own wood flour. This is dust here that has been collected in a shop vac bag here. Okay, now what we're going to do is mix up some of the epoxy. So here's the System 3 epoxy with some of the wood flour. So this is the wood flour that came from System 3. That's very fine powder. It's also fairly light color. And we'll also use some of the wood flour that was from my sanded floor. I was doing some experiments on the first round. And so this is some scrap wood. It's not actually what my wood floor looks like. It is tongue and groove, and I was just experimenting with how much it would settle and things like that. And my initial pass, I used a lot of this wood flour, the wood flour that I had created in it, and it resulted in this really dark color. And so I found that the less wood flour I use, the lighter the color becomes. And so I'm hoping that by using some of this lighter wood flour with some of the darker wood flour of mine, I'll be able to get something that roughly matches what my floor looks like inside, which is this, minus all the paint. So let's see, here's another experiment. This was, I know it looks like a waste, but this is a rosette that I had gouged up, so I was using it to just see what kind of colors would come out. And this is more like where I want to be with the color. And this is done just by adding less wood flour. It just gets a lighter color. So we're gonna do some mixing. So with epoxies like this, it's almost always a simple 1-to-1. So that's what we're gonna do. I've actually already done one whole coat of epoxy on the floor already, and I've had my friend John sand down the floor the second time because the epoxy had a bunch of bubbles that hadn't really settled in. So he's sanding it back down to a smooth surface, and then the resin had settled a little bit. And so our objective here is to make a flush surface. So this is like round 2. But the first time it took an awful lot of this stuff, so yeah, I'm going again with kind of a lot all at once here. So now I'll start adding some wood flour. So I'll add like a spoonful of this and a spoonful of the darker stuff. So the working time on this stuff, in case you're curious, is 45 minutes. So that's a really pretty long working time for epoxies. The total drying time is 72 hours. Although inside it's actually been almost 5 days, I think, since the first application, and it still was a tiny bit tacky, but not enough that I couldn't sand it down. I used an awful lot, hoping that I can do this all in one batch. And here we are inside, and so this is the kind of experiment area. So I removed a wall in this room, and these 3 floorboards are where the wall previously had been. And so this side of the floor and this side of the floor are 2 separate rooms. This is the hallway, this is the living room, and this area in the middle, I'm trying to approximately get the same thing. Also, most of the floor, it's hard to see, but most of the floor when we moved in had wood filler up and down every single one of these floorboard cracks. But as time has gone on, more and more of the wood filler has come out. And so wood filler in a floor like this won't ever last. So we found it lasted for probably about a year before it started cracking out in mass. And so now we've got these cracks everywhere. So where we have removed this floor though, because there was a wall here, there was no wood filler in between any of the cracks. And so what we're trying is this new epoxy approach to see if it will last longer than the wood filler did. I've already done 1 layer of epoxy in here, so that's this bit that you can see in here is already 1 layer of epoxy. It settled down a lot more than I thought, or than I expected, because I had it flush when I put it all in, but then it settled into the crack. So we'll see if we can get it all the way flush to this second coating. Okay, let's get to it. Here it is. So what I'll do is go down the entire line, and then the excess epoxy scrape up backwards like this, and then that kind of collects it all up there, and then I'll just move that on down the line. Alright, and then I've got to take this down the entire length of the floorboard down to that opposite corner. So I'll do that. Okay, here's a closer look now that we're all done. I went back over it a couple times off camera. In the cracks here, it had continued to sink in a couple of times, so I just went back over it another few times. And what I've settled on for now is that, you know, there's still a fair amount of epoxy that's on the surface here. The first time I went across this, I went over it with a mineral spirits soaked rag to kind of clean up the epoxy that was sitting on the surface. But this time around, I'm leaving a heavier layer of epoxy all the way across the surface because I don't want the rag to go in between the cracks and start soaking it up. So with the success in sanding this stuff, I'm going to just let it dry here, and then we're going to do more sanding to get a flush surface, and hopefully it won't sink in any further. Okay, this is now 3 days later, or 4 days later, after letting the epoxy dry, and it looks pretty good. So these are the 3 floorboards, and these 2 here are the ones that we filled with epoxy. So I'd say this looks really pretty good. Like, we got it pretty flush. In some cases where the floor is a little bit lower, you can see there's this big puddle of epoxy, and so I'm going to have to sand these 3 boards down again to get rid of all the epoxy on the top, and then we'll polyurethane over the top to kind of finish. Occasionally in some places there are little bubbles like this that occurred, and it's not perfect. I think that's, you know, from air that was trapped underneath the epoxy, and before the epoxy could fully dry, some of the air escaped. So I've got my sander out again, hooked up to the vacuum, and I'm gonna go along. I was checking to make sure that it was hard enough to actually sand off the epoxy here, and so I'm going to go along and sand off these 3 boards once more, and then we'll get to polyurethaning it to be complete. Alright, now we have the 3 boards sanded down. I also wiped it down with some rubbing alcohol to pick up debris and dust that was left over from the sanding. The sanding I did 3 passes. I did 60, then 100, and then a 220. And I've got my wood stain here. Some are oak, and there's another part of the floor where I've used the same color stain, so I'm trusting that it will look good over here as well. So let's go ahead and get started on the stain, just applying with a brush. Okay, that does it for the staining. I'll give it a couple of minutes per the can instructions, 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'll wipe it back up here with this rag. It's probably already been that long down this side, so I'm gonna give it a wipe here and see how it looks underneath. And that's that. I'll get the polyurethane on here in a couple hours. All right, so this is now a day later. The stain is all dried. Looks really great. As you can see, this is the first new board, the second new board, the third new board, and this is one of the old ones. And so this is on one side of it, this is on the other. Like, it looks really good. It's pretty incredible, actually. So one last step though, I'm going to polyurethane it. I don't like applying polyurethane multiple times, so this is extra thick version. So that process is real simple. Just brush it on. All right, one final update on the floor refinishing project. It's now been over a year since I originally refinished the floor where the wall was removed right here. Now there's this archway. Pardon the 2x4s, that's unrelated to another project. But yeah, as far as the epoxy holding up, this is epoxy. This is epoxy coverage, and this is epoxy coverage, and that's it. Just those 2 stripes. But then over here to the left, you can see this is like the wood putty filler of the original floor from when we moved in. So the epoxy wood flour sawdust filler has held up just absolutely amazing in the past year, while the wood filler that had been here when we moved in the house continues to deteriorate. All told, as far as color match goes, you really would not be able to tell that there was a wall here previously. There's some slight differentiation in the color, but if you weren't looking for it, there's no way that you would know that that was not the way it's been. So that's it for the update. I think the epoxy combination is a complete winner. This is what I'll be doing in the future. No more using expensive, inadequate wood filler whenever I'm filling in cracks in these old floors. I'll be doing the epoxy sawdust combination from here on out. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video.